First of all, Herzog Hospital is based in Jerusalem. It was established in 1894.
Okay.
And originally it was called Ezrat Nashim. Why? Because in the old city of Jerusalem in 1894, there wasn't modern Jerusalem then, you had a lot of women having many, many children, and at that point they were suffering from something called postpartum depression, which in 1894 no one knew what that was. So a group of other women organized a group called Ezrat Nashim to help these women, to give them like a home to stay in for a month after they gave birth if they were having psychological problems. That very quickly grew to include all mental illness, and 10 years later it included men. And for the first 70 years of the hospital's existence, we were primarily a psychiatric hospital. And we're actually the first psychiatric hospital in the entire Middle East. In fact, there's a small story that King Hussein's father, the king of Jordan, that from 1949 to 1952, he was secretly hospitalized by us because he had schizophrenia. That's why King Hussein became the king and not his father. And for 40 years, Rabbanit Sarah Herzog was the president of Ezrat Nashim from 1940 to about 1980. When she passed away, the leadership of the hospital decided to change the name to Sarah Herzog Hospital. Today, we're called basically Herzog Hospital. In the last 40 years, we've changed dramatically. We still have psychiatry, which is for men and for women, but because of the changes in healthcare and psychiatry and the needs for geriatrics, of our 330 beds, 75% are for geriatrics and 25% for mental illness, basically schizophrenia. Israel's Ministry of Health came to us and said, can you set up a program for children? Now, there's a problem with children that are born with some sort of difficulty or have some sort of accident where their brain is affected and they can't breathe. So this geriatric hospital set up a department which now has 25 children from the ages of 3 months to 18 years who unfortunately are in worse condition than the 80-year-old on a respirator. They had some sort of accident with the oxygen that stopped going to the brain, and these kids are on respirators possibly the rest of their lives. We also have a department called the Israel Center for the Treatment of Psychotrauma. This started about 20 years ago, and it started to treat people who suffered in terrorist attacks or wars or Holocaust survivors who had what they call PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, it's not necessarily someone who was injured in a terrorist attack, okay? It's someone, for example, who witnessed a terrorist attack and saw someone's arm blown off, but they weren't injured, and the Israeli healthcare system, they were not eligible for any kind of mental health care. But they could wake up every night seeing the picture, so we started this program, okay, and it grew dramatically, and we are basically the leading organization in Israel in not only treating psychological trauma, but training all the psychologists, social workers, and teachers in Israel how to help kids deal with psychotrauma. And like I said, since we can't treat everybody, we work within the system. We work with the teachers in the schools to how to identify kids. We work in each municipality. During the fighting in Gaza and the fighting in Lebanon 5-6 years ago, even though we're based in Jerusalem, we were all over the country helping out. 9/11, September 11th, the U.S. government invited us to come and help after 9/11. After Hurricane Katrina, the U.S. government invited us to help in New Orleans to train people who were suffering from trauma. We've been very active in Mexico City, because in Mexico City, about 25 years ago, you had a terrible earthquake that killed several thousand people. That's trauma. We're not talking about the Jewish community, we're talking about the general professional healthcare community, and clearly the Jewish community as well. Now, what did this do? This made the Jewish community in Mexico City look very good, because they were helping their fellow Mexicans. helped Israel, because here's Israel helping other people. And clearly, for Herzog, we were in the background doing the service, so it was a win-win-win situation, as they say. Albert Einstein Medical Center. Okay? It happens to be, I'm told, the largest or most successful hospital in all of Latin America. Okay? Clearly, they picked the name Albert Einstein, very interesting, and the Jewish community there supports it tremendously. I've been there, it's a beautiful, modern hospital. When they came to visit us, they told us we're very good at everything we do, except geriatric care. We don't know how to treat Alzheimer's. We don't know how to treat Parkinson's. Can your doctors help us? We started a program whereby video conference, once a month, one of our doctors sitting in Jerusalem, will give a presentation to other doctors sitting in Sao Paulo, with the time difference and everything, on, okay, how do you identify Alzheimer's? And for all of us who know someone who has Alzheimer's, or a family member, it's very frightening, okay? The general public doesn't know that over 65% of people diagnosed with Alzheimer's do not have Alzheimer's. Because the doctors in the world, I'm talking about the best doctors in the US, okay, aren't properly trained to diagnose Alzheimer's. We've done fascinating research that shows the level of a person's spirituality, not religious belief, but spirituality, slows down the advance of Alzheimer's. We've proven it. It was the first public research done in the world. We all say...
I think we published it. Yes.
Okay. Most people say, yeah, as you get older, you believe in something greater and it helps you. We proved it. We all hear about the politics. Okay? That where's there going to be peace and who's going to give what and so on and so forth. For many, 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 many years, we at Herzog have had numerous joint projects with Palestinian medical professionals. Recently, we have had a program called Cherish, which was supported by the European Union, which basically brought together Palestinian psychologists and Israeli psychologists. Basically, it was a project we started at Herzog from the Israel Center for the Treatment of Psychotrauma. And we looked at the trauma of the children. How can we help the children? Because if you have medical professionals, they're not politicians. And by the way, 20% of our staff at Herzog are Arabs. Okay? Doctors, head nurses, some of the best staff we have, okay, are Arabs. Okay? And people say, well, what about their politics? When they come into the hospital, there's no politics. You might remember that about 7 years ago, there was a terrible terrorist attack in Chechnya, in Russia, where they came into the school and they killed like 200 kids.
Yes.
Okay? UNICEF, which again is not a friend of Israel, but knew about our work, they invited our trauma professionals to go to Chechnya to train the social workers and teachers in Chechnya how to help them deal with the surviving children and family members. So, the advantage of healthcare is it can benefit everybody. Right? And now to go to another side altogether that can only benefit those who are now dealing with cleaning for Passover or Pésaj. Would you believe, okay, that there's something called the depression of dealing with preparing for Passover? Right? And every year the Israeli newspapers come to our hospital because we have the best people in the world dealing with in Israel in dealing with depression, okay? That they run a whole spread of our doctors giving tips how not to get depressed from Passover. Passover cleaning, cooking, whatever it might be. So we're more than happy to work with, you and the website, okay, to put tips about how to deal with Passover and
Can you give us 3 tips or 5 tips?
3 tips or 5 tips. I'm not the doctor, okay? But everything I've learned from the doctors is don't let the pressure get to you, okay? Passover will happen whether you clean everything or you don't clean everything. The family will come whether you make enough food for 20 people or 30 people, okay? And it's part of our natural dealing with things. Same thing with trauma, okay? What's trauma? Trauma is when an abnormal event happens to a normal person. In the wild, okay, with animals, they call it the flee or freeze concept, okay? If an animal is about to be attacked, let's say a tiger is about to attack a deer, okay? The deer, when it sees it's threatened, will freeze. And if it succeeds in running away, what's the first thing it does? It shakes the body. It gets the trauma out of its body.
Okay.
Okay, you haven't been trained to do that, to get rid of it, okay? There are all kinds of techniques. In fact, when we had our trauma specialists come to Mexico City, they spoke about that.
Okay.
There are all kinds of techniques, how to use your body to process the mind. In Latin America, I know there are a lot of Holocaust survivors, okay? We have also specialized in dealing with the trauma of Holocaust survivors. And I'll give you a very, very simple example. This came out of one of our video conferences. There was, not by us, but in a hospital in Toronto, a patient who was in an old age home, okay? And every third day they would come into his room and the room would smell. They couldn't understand what the smell was. They found that when he went to the cafeteria, he took bread with him and put it under his pillow. He was a survivor, so he was used to stealing food, so he would have to eat. What would happen with the bread after 3 days? It starts smelling, okay? So the staff there had a choice. They could remove the bread, at which point the Holocaust survivor who was suffering from Alzheimer's would have an Alzheimer's episode. He would start screaming, "Where's my food? Who stole my food?" Or they could write in his medical chart, every 3 days, change the bread, which is what they did. So he would always reach under the pillow, feel his bread, and be okay. And that's what all of us need to learn when we're dealing with older family members, parents, grandparents, whatever, that while we love them, they're not the same people they were 20 years ago. And there's ways to work with them to help them, which then helps us as well caring for them. Religion doesn't come into the care, okay? It doesn't matter who you are or what your background is, you're going to get the same kind of care. So one could say the motivation of Judaism is to care for the next person. And it's not a religious thing, it's not a spiritual thing, it's a fundamental, almost ethical thing. We care about that person.